Let me introduce first our guest tonight, Damon Locks. He is a Chicago-based visual artist, educator, vocalist, and musician. He attended the Art Institute of Chicago, where he received his BFA in Fine Arts. Since 2014, he's been working with prisons and neighborhood arts projects at Stateville Correctional Center teaching art. He operated as an artist mentor in the Chicago Artists Coalition program Fieldwork, and in 2017, he became a Soros Justice Media Fellow. In 2019, he became a 3 Arts Awardee. Currently, he works as artist in residence as part of the Museum of Contemporary Arts Space program, introducing civically engaged art into the curriculum at the high school Goode STEM Academy. So tonight, I'm really pleased to also introduce Traci Lombre, who is a PhD candidate in American culture here at the University of Michigan, and she was a graduate fellow in the Center for World Performance Studies, which I'm thrilled about, in 2018. Her research is centered around 19th and 20th century cultural history of African Americans in the Midwest, Harlem Renaissance, jazz history and culture, Black music, and community development. So we're going to get rolling right now with about 15 minutes of Damon playing. And again, thank you, Damon, for being part of our series. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
I'm invisible simply because people refuse to see me. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world. I'm invisible simply because people refuse to see me. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world. I'm invisible simply because people refuse to see me. It is sometimes most often rather nerves. Wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in people's minds with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world. I'm invisible simply because people refuse to see me. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves to see me. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world. I'm invisible simply because people refuse to see me.
Wow. When you do that, you get the feeling of the beat, then you get the moving, then you say, yeah, then you just get better and better. Everybody give you, compliments, and you just keep practicing and say, I'm good, and you have confidence in yourself. It's your thing to make everybody say that you're good, and it's your thing to do to make everybody like. So you just thinking as you popping, you just thinking the thing to make people say, wow, ooh, how do you do that? And when you do that, you get the feeling of the beat, then you get the moving, then you say, oh, I'm good, and you just get better and better. Everybody give you, compliments, and you just keep practicing and say, I'm good, and you have confidence in yourself.
They don't like you.
What'd you say?
They don't like you.
Now, if I understand right, if I understand right, if you had pleaded guilty, you would have already been out of jail. Now, if I understand right, if I understand right, if you had pleaded guilty, you would have already been out of jail.
Probably would have. I probably would have went in front of the parole board in a year and made parole. I probably would have been.
Sounds like a pretty good deal.
If I was guilty, I probably would have taken it.
But you didn't take it. Because
I'm not guilty.
Make up our stuff real quick, and we battle, and we always win. We make up our stuff real quick. We make up our stuff real quick, and we battle, and we always win.
The problem is we've been standing there for 200 years knocking on that door, and he hasn't opened the door because we haven't been speaking his language. So his mother tongue is
Power! Hello, everyone. Welcome. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Great. Damon, that was an amazing piece, amazing composition. Immediately takes one through a range of emotions right off the bat with the blues, the speech, the rhythms. Can you just tell us a bit about the piece and your inspiration for it?
Well, it's kind of an improvised. That was an improvised piece based on some stuff that I have. A lot of the work I do and a lot of the sound work I do is around investigating ideas around race and culture, and a lot of issues that we contend with today are things that I'm looking for. I'm mining the past to create a kind of a futuristic sound. So throughout the work I have and the samples I collect have come from voices that have happened in the past, addressing a lot of the same issues. So you might hear an Ozzie Davis reciting something from Ralph Ellison, or you might have someone speaking about incarceration or issues around power. So those are just kind of things that get cycled through my work. I'm interested in collaging and sampling with sound and visuals. And so things get used in different ways, backwards and forwards.
Wow, that's great. It's amazing. I didn't realize at the time. I know you were, it seemed as if you were improvising, but it comes together so well to deliver, you know, a real message in every moment with the beats and the rhythms, the sounds, the speeches. It's a range of emotion for the listener. With that in mind, you know, hearing you say like your goal to attempt to collage both visual art as well as the music. Going back to, I guess, your early days of, I know you're from Washington, D.C. area, and you arrived in Chicago to attend the Art Institute of Chicago in 1988, and you were also playing in a rock band, so Trench Mouth. So going back to 1988, were those seeds of social, political, and power statements in your music and art as an 18-year-old in Chicago?
Yeah, I think they were, but they were so young, so fresh, you know. I grew up in DC, and in DC, when I found the kind of the punk scene that was in DC, there were bands like the Bad Brains and Minor Threat, and there were a lot of groups that I think just for the sake of being in the nation's capital, things were very political. So there was a lot of political music, and I was really drawn to political music in the punk scene. And I was drawn to political music everywhere, but that's where I was like kind of first found it, you know. And I think that I was excited to do that as a young person, and I just didn't know how to, you know. I wrote political songs, but with the, you know, with the background of a young person that just didn't do the work yet, you know. So as I grew and saw examples of other kind of sonic political things, I just absorbed those. So I think other than like punk music, groups like Public Enemy were great examples of a kind of a sonic like clash of ideas and the discord and kind of rubbing up against society in a particular way. So I took the work of Public Enemy and the Bomb Squad to heart, and that was like the first group that I really heard doing kind of sonic collage in that way, you know. So I think that the work I needed time, you know. In my younger days, it was political and it was just kind of interesting to push the boundaries. But I think in the most recent years of, you know, work, I really needed to like figure out how to engage in community and how to affect the change that I'm interested in creating. Does that make sense, Traci?
Yeah, of course it does. And that brings me to like the question of thinking of Chicago. You know, Chicago's been my home as an adult as well. And Chicago's a place that is, you know, very heavily into the arts, but also community engagement and activism. So has Chicago, your time in Chicago, helped form or help shape you, and in what ways has Chicago perhaps played a role in your development with your music and art?
Yeah, Chicago's been a huge influence. I mean, I've been here now since 1988, so it's a long time. But I think one of the things, I was a music publicist for 10 years, which means that I was a person that would book photo shoots and interviews for musicians that we worked for, and we would like get press for people in newspapers and magazines. And when I quit that job, I wanted to put my own music and my own art to the forefront. And I thought to myself, what does that look like? What does an artist look like? What does an artist do? And I've said this many times, but the template for the artist of going into your studio, making wonderful, amazing work, and then presenting it to the world, and the world expecting the world to love it, just didn't seem to make sense to me. So I thought I need to get out into the world and make work that's in response to the conversations I'm having. So I needed to figure out how I would get out into the world. From my apartment, like I was just quit my job. I'm looking outside. I'm like, how do I get out there? You know? So I started with schools, and I started talking to teachers and doing kind of talks with students, and doing engaging with art with students, and making work in that engagement. But I think the most pivotal change was when I was asked to collaborate with Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project, which is a program that does arts and humanities classes at Stateville Correctional Center, which is the maximum security prison outside of Chicago. So when I started working there, that's when a lot of things kind of crystallized and like moved forward in a way that it hadn't in the past. This was I started this in 2014, and there was a very public internet kind of, I don't know how to say this gingerly, but there was a lot of Black people getting killed, you know, publicly on video that we were engaging with online. And this is right when I was starting to go into prison. I started going to prison, not knowing what I would see in prison. And when I walked into Stateville, I saw a Black man. I saw what looked like 95% Black men. Being nervous to go into maximum security prison, what I found when I walked in is I saw, walking down the halls of Stateville, I saw Black men that would say, "Hey, brother, how you doing? What are you doing here?" And I was like, "I'm teaching art." They're like, "Okay, cool." And I felt more uncomfortable in a truck stop in Illinois than I did walking down the halls of a maximum security prison. So going into prison, seeing what our justice system is up close, seeing how skewed it is, coming out and another person gets murdered, I needed to work on this sonically. So I kind of stopped doing visual work, and I started on a project that led to the Black Monument Ensemble. It started as solo sound work, working on issues, listening to the voices of people in the past, dealing with a bunch of these issues, collaging them into new sounds so that people could hear them anew in a new context. I believe that I'm just kind of getting into the stream, so that voices of like Ozzie Davis or Lena Horne or Angela Davis or whomever, Ruby Dee, can be heard again addressing these things. And from that moment, it built and built until I had a group of singers. I started working with young dancers and kind of put that all together. I started more intensely working with making projects in prison. So we made animation projects in prison dealing with issues around incarceration. So Chicago, I don't know, I think I was just in the place I needed to be. And so it became the thing that helped me kind of find my voice. And it also, I think making the effort of looking for community, looking for making work for community, like just doing that effort paid off. And then, people are like, yeah, let's do work together,
Yeah, that's beautiful. And as you describe that, it takes me back to the piece that you just performed of, giving life to these old sounds that are mixed in with new sounds that are keeping us aware of what's happening now, but what also happened then. So it was beautiful, just amazing, and it brings me to think about like influences that it seems as if you're building on, like the Advancement or Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, the AACM. I know they were founded at their very first meeting I recently learned was at the Southside Community Arts Center in Chicago, which was, a special space for people to, come together and, use their art for reasons of progressive, for progress, so to speak. So I see this. It looks like a legacy that you're continuing. That's very fresh and exciting. So as a Chicagoan, I my hats off to you for that.
Oh, thank you. Well, the AACM is a huge influence. The AACM, Afrocobra, which is the arts movement that came out of Chicago. These are wonderful models for how you can engage and make work. How you can make work with people, how you can make work for people. So being in that history here in Chicago, connecting to that history is a really wonderful thing. But also thinking about your Emory Douglases who did all the work for the Black Panther newspaper, thinking about artists who use their platforms to engage and to also to uplift other artists. So I feel like there's a history of that, and I've really wanted to figure out ways of plugging into that.
Just touching back on your work that you do at Stateville Prison, my very first job as a 16-year-old was working in a county jail, and it was a weird experience in that one, like you said, you connect with the people, but at the same time, you're dealing with people that are dealing with heavy situations, and so my question to you is, what's it like as you're driving home and you're reflecting and you're thinking about what you just did in that prison? What are some of your reflections like as you're thinking about, what you taught today, and also carrying, I guess you say, the burden of the situation of being with people in a prison?
Well, the drive home is an important part of the work. Actually, we talk about that a lot. Normally we'll have carpooled out there with several of the teachers so that we can kind of decompress. Often that involves stopping at the Walgreens and getting like chips and candy bars, which we mostly don't eat in real life, but we're like, oh, give me a Reese's peanut butter cup or something, just to prop yourself up a little bit, with something like sweet and that you shouldn't be doing. But anyway, there's so many feelings that are involved in working in prison. First off, primarily, we do work there in order to uplift the voices of people that you don't hear from, to talk about the justice system. So if we're going to have a justice system that gives people 80 years with no parole and truth in sentencing, we should know what that looks like. And so we create projects that provide viewers, people going to exhibitions, people looking at animation projects that we've done, reading books that we've put out with their writing in it. Our hopes are that the writing, the visual work, all gives you proximity to their lives, that so that you can kind of understand what their lives are like and their struggles, right? So that's something that we do in PNAP that's very important. We try to provide some connection to people that don't really have that people don't have connection to. We also think about how we deal with harm. How in society, how we deal with harm as a society, you know? So there are people that have done very damaging things in prison. And there are people that are damaged by society that have done damaging things in prison. So we try to have a conversation and we try to create a platform that we can just think about what we're doing. Do the statistics back up this idea that it's helpful to put people away for the rest of their lives? Because 20, 30 years ago, we weren't giving people 80 years, 100 years, you know, that wasn't the punishment. So what is behind these punishments? But specifically, the drive home and afterwards, there can be really difficult days. There can be really difficult days where you have a conversation with someone that is going through something that's really hard to imagine, where they weren't able to see their child or touch their child or hug their child because a new restriction has gone on them. There's sometimes people will just lament the fact that they will never have their freedom, right? So you take that home with you, right? And then sometimes you've had the most amazing conversation. You've had the most productive day where people made art, where you're going to be super happy to present this work to other people. You know, you can have a day where you're actually just talking about how light and shadow lands on a face, and you can talk about that. It's something that once I started, I felt really obligated to continue. I felt obligated in my heart to continue. And it is the most fulfilling and some of the most depressing experiences I've ever had.
Is it customary for you to go and compose or to, I guess, work on a new piece or new materials after you come back on those tough days when you're home? I mean, does it create inspiration to kind of release energy to create something like what we just heard, or the pieces of it?
Well, I think that the prison experience of, you know, the experience of teaching in prison is part and parcel of a larger practice that I do, you know? Mm-hmm. So I take those feelings and they apply to working with the vocalists, or they apply to working with the dancers, or they apply to the samples I sample, or the lyrics I write, or the visual work I make, you know? There's a piece on a new record that Black Monument is putting out soon called Keep Your Mind Free. And I wrote that in response to when the pandemic first happened. The program PNAP, the program had to pivot from being a teaching organization to being an organization that was like trying to get soap in, trying to get hand sanitizer in, trying to provide for people once COVID got in. And from our apartments, we were trying to make those things happen, and talking to friends and talking, you know, it was really hard to stay motivated with so much unknown. And I started to picture, if you were in prison and COVID had gotten into prison, what would you do? And I thought a message I would send to them is to keep your mind free, as difficult as that is, you know? So it does work its way into the music.
You know, thinking about you, as you say, quitting your job and deciding that you're going to be a full-time artist. You know, we're at a university, and I'm thinking that, you know, being especially a college student during these times, that maybe you're studying economics or art or dance, and all of a sudden the world has made you think beyond just going to get a job in a cubicle. What would you say to that person who's feeling the inspiration, to that student or that soon to be graduate who's feeling the inspiration to do more than just go get a job in their major, but to make a difference in the world, but it's just a little scared about how to do it? Is there any advice that you would give to that young person who's kind of where you were when you decided that you were going to go and do art full time?
Well, I will say that no doubt it's totally scary. Because when I quit my job, I quit without a safety net. I was just like, I'm just going to quit, and then I'll just have to figure it out, you know? But I think that we all naturally in our DNA have specific things to bring to the table. And whether your thing is like, I'm a great cook, you know, or, you know, I'm a great guitar player, there's a way to add to the conversation, you know, add to the table that our society needs. You know, what can we bring to the potluck of social engagement? You know, what's our home recipe, you know? And it took me a while to really figure out what that was for me, because as I said, when I quit my job, I was just like, what does an artist do? How do I be an artist? And I decided that being an artist looked like someone that had a lot of conversations with people, you know, that talked to students, that talked to people and made work in collaboration with dancers, with students, with people behind bars. That also meant being a guy that played records, you know, on Saturday nights sometimes, you know, so that people could dance. You know, so there's no formula, but I feel like following your gut and putting that idea to the forefront. There was a moment that I honestly can remember where I had been doing graphic design as a way of making money after I quit my job. And at some point I just said, I'm not taking any more jobs that are not politically aligned with what I wanted to do. And so then that's not easy. So I had to actually then seek out people. I had to like ask people. I had to go into spaces that I hadn't been in before to make those things. And all of those things led to where I am today. So, yeah.
That's great wisdom and advice to basically get out of your space, go meet people, whether you're an accountant, whether you're a musician, whether you're a cook, and basically get rooted in your community in some form or fashion is kind of what I hear, is just be human and be a neighbor.
That's exactly
what I get out of that. Yeah.
That's totally it. I mean, recently I've been saying this a lot, and it just makes sense, you know, like when people think about art, I begin to think about throwing that term away, because it's just humans trying to communicate ideas to humans. And that just sounds like living to me. You know, art is just a label to put on it. So I do art so I can have this conversation with you, Traci, you know, like that's why I'm doing it, you know, so I can get into rooms, whether they're Zoom rooms or real life. I'm doing this so to have conversations, to exchange ideas.
Sorry to chime in because we have some questions in the chat, and what you just said is very apropos for some of the questions right now. So
cool.
I thought I would just kind of sneak in. We have a multi-question question, but I think you answered some of it. And Sharman was interested in what you had a lot of samples of different voices at the beginning. I think they're through kind of historical in nature, some of them, and others maybe more current. And what draws you to those? Are you like on alert all the time for getting those? And she's asking if you're constantly like taking your phone out to sample things, and then kind of culminating in what you just mentioned. How do you separate kind of your personal life from that creative process? But I think you kind of got into a little bit of that, but.
Well, yeah, I go through periods of sampling. There's times where I just have a real urge to find more new material. So I will go on deep dives. So the great thing is that it's a great assignment, like I find myself watching tons of documentaries because they might have a clip that I want, like I was watching these, there are two documentaries out called The People and the Police. There was one in DC and there's one in San Francisco. And I watched the whole thing just to see if there was anything in there. And so the knowledge I'm gaining, the knowledge I'm getting while I'm doing that is just stuff that will work within all these other realms, So I collect sounds. Sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they make it into something. Sometimes I try to fit them into something. And then eventually I might delete them because they just didn't work, But there was a sound. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Hold on. I think hold on. Yeah, hold on.
They don't like you.
What'd you say?
They don't like you.
Did you guys hear that? They don't like you. What'd you say? They don't like you. That was from a story that aired on the radio about people in schools. Like a journalist was in the school kind of looking at how people are doing testing. And she uncovered that some teachers were basically giving students the answers. And when she came into school the next day, the journalist came into school, some little kid came up to her, tugged her on the pants and said, "They don't like you." What'd you say? They don't like you. And so I was just like, that's such a good sample. And I've held on to that forever, for like a year and a half. And just recently I was able to find a place for it. So yes, I do catalog and keep samples for a long time because there's something. And when I hear it, I know it and I grab it. And as far as how do I compartmentalize the work, is that one of the questions? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think she'd be saying how you can separate between your personal and your art making, as far as that. Yeah, your personal life and your creative process. Like, is there any separation in dealing with it?
No, I don't think so. I think it's all part of the same thing. Whether I'm watching like One Night in Miami, which I highly recommend, or drawing or sampling, it's all part of the whole thing, or having a phone conversation. It's all part of it. I think probably the only thing that's separate is probably ordering takeout. That's the only thing that's separate. It's a whole separate category.
And a deep one.
Yeah.
There's a question from Professor Magda Zaborowska. I'm sorry, Magda, if I'm butchering your last name. She thanks you for the performance, and she would like to know, how do you define monumental, given how you mix and sample elements of literature, visual arts, movement, sound, and more visceral experiential elements of environments, bodies, and effect?
Well, I'd say within the question, right? The list of things that were mentioned that I put together, that sounds monumental to me. That sounds good. I was like, oh, that's a good description. I'm gonna have to cut and paste that myself, But when I think of the use of monument in the term Black Monument Ensemble, it seemed like the perfect word because there's so much about representation. There's so much about marking a moment or a time. There's so much about trying to encompass a lot, Also, Black Monument Ensemble can be up to like 17 people, so monument just seemed to be such a good word for it, because it's beyond me. So and it seems very monumental to pull off, but then at the same time, it's like marking something, you know, it's like acknowledging a thing. And the thing that I'm trying to acknowledge is not just what we're doing, but what has been done and what has always been done. So that's part of the marking and acknowledging. I hope that was a good answer.
Thank you. There's another question from Cameron Wilson. Cameron asks, can you talk about the process that goes on between making art in response to community, influencing people's hearts to get things changed, and reaching a wide audience of different kinds of people? It seems that art centered around social justice topics can be difficult to spread outside of a certain bubble of people who are already interested in a certain cause.
I think that you're right. That does happen often. And I think that a tactic that I've tried to, use would be to make work in collaboration with a broad amount of people. For me to make work that engages a bunch of different people brings in all these other perspectives and all these other nuances and all these other flavors, that it's not just about my opinion. I have a thought about what I want to do and what I want to say. Dana Hall, who plays drums, comes with a whole body of work and a body of thought. Reese Smith, the percussionist, the same. Angel Bat Dawid, Philip Armstrong, Eric Trayvon, Eric. Everyone has a wellspring of ideas, and their ideas are in the piece. In the same way that if you do a piece of art that's a collage, and you want to use a tree from this and a building from that, you cut out the tree, you glue it down with the building over here. You have a new piece of work that you put together, but the light hitting the leaves in the original photograph are still there affecting you. The windows, the reflections in the windows of the building from the original photograph are adding to your thoughts. So the more people that have involved, and the wider the wider the scope the work can have, because it's so much more layered than you could do if you were just creating it yourself. And hopefully I did an okay job at answering that. I had lots of thoughts about it, because it's something I think about all the time in terms of when you want to make work that makes people think. And sometimes I think that work where you want to engage with people, it's better to ask questions than to give answers. Because when you give an answer, the conversation's over. When you ask a question, it keeps going. So I think that's really important also, to ask good questions of your audience.
No, the answer makes a lot of sense. It's, from the start, it almost sounds like, think of something that's already geared toward a collaboration rather than a one-person project, or at least that's what I'm getting out of what you just said. So.
Yeah, well, you can actually have a breadth of layers of that. It can be you. I'm doing some visual work for a show coming up. That's just me, staying up till 3:00 in the morning, drawing, doing stuff, and that's going to be just me. But that's only one piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. Sophia Fortunato, she said that you've spoken about a sort of temporal collage using references to the past mixed with futuristic sounds elements. Do you identify or place your work within Afrofuturism?
These questions are so good. These are probably the best. Tonight's probably the best set of questions I've ever had. Like, Some of them are like a paragraph long and they're just good, you know? So here's the funny thing. I don't think too much about Afrofuturism. And I know that Afrofuturism is very important to a lot of people. But I think I've always been, the reason why I got into punk when I was like a 14-year-older is that, or since I was 14 years old, not a 14-year-older, I think it was because it was an idea about freedom. Even though punk was a particular thing, it was less of a particular thing in 1983. It was like, okay, you're weird, you can do this. Okay. So it was a freedom to be weird. And I find labels that categorize restrictive. I think they're useful, and I think they're useful for other people. I think they're useful for writers. I think it's useful for classes. I think it's useful for people that need to have categories. But I don't think Sun Ra needed it. I don't think Octavia Butler needed it. You know, they were just doing their work. So I think that, you know, I think that what I do does fit within the parameters. You can make a good argument that it's Afrofuturism, but I'm not really thinking about it when I'm doing my work. Oh, you're on mute.
That always happens. We have one more question that I think we have time for. It's from Emery Kimball. What ways can an uninformed person start learning more about the civil rights movement and its history during the pandemic? Do you have any books or documentaries that you recommend?
Well, you know, there is the Southern Poverty Law Center has a really wonderful podcast called Teaching Hard History. It's a resource for teachers in terms of like augmenting, you know, syllabi about civil rights, but it is excellent. So I highly suggest listening to that podcast, because that podcast also gives you resources. Like everything that they've covered in a particular episode, they will have resources behind it. Anything that they mention will be available. So it's a really wonderful resource. And I'm not just saying that because they use a Black Monument song as their theme song. I'm saying it because it's an excellent podcast. And without that, I would have been like, I don't know how to answer that question. But with it, it's I listen to it and I learn something every time. They also have a music person on that show, person that does like makes these like takes moments to break out and highlight like music of the civil rights era, or thematically unpack how people are responding, you know, to different eras in different ways, whether it's Parliament Funkadelic or DMX, Who We Be. I was like, this guy's good. So anyway, Teaching Hard History.
Ingrid has placed the link in the chat for someone who wants it, and Mike Goode also added another organization, tolerance.org, in the chat for those of you who might be interested. We're about 2 minutes. Mike, should I?
Yeah, I think we're right on time.
Well, this was fun.
Yeah. Thank you both. I just want to say thank you, Traci, for being moderator, and thank you, Damon, for performing and your wonderful, you know, answers to these wonderful questions.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me as well, Damon. It was nice meeting you here.
Likewise. I wish this was real life, because then I can be like, hey, everyone, shake hands. And I can say, this is the instruments and this is how it works. And this is what I'm using. But, you know, next time after COVID, maybe I can come back and I can show you all the instruments, which is always fun.
Yeah. Being on campus, we can all celebrate together, and with a handshake and a hug, hopefully, because it'll be a great day when we can get to that point. So I want to thank everybody, and just a quick shout out to our program manager, Ingrid Racine, who makes everything go smoothly. And we appreciate, keep your eyes out for our next guests on, you can look us up at Center for Work Performance Studies. And thank you all. Be safe and sane and happy. Thanks again, Damon, and thank you, Traci.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good to see you all.